Sir, I think we should start now.
Should we start now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. All right. Good evening to all of you. This is the class MPSC 005, the code number, and the title of the course is State and Society in Africa. Today is the third class of this particular session. In the previous two classes, we basically started out with an overview of Africa, introducing African continent, which is a very important continent, but nevertheless, it has not received as much academic or scholarly attention as it should have been. The colonial legacy, nationalism, how it impacted all the states of Africa in different ways and forms, statehood, the different kinds of regimes in Africa. Some of them are totalitarian, some of them are authoritarian, some of them are trying to at least have some semblance of democratic legitimacy. Issues of development, which has been uneven, as I have said in my previous classes. There are parts of Africa, for example, countries like South Africa, even to some extent Ethiopia and Kenya, they have been a little bit advanced in terms of. So the point that I'm trying to make is there has been uneven development in different parts, between eastern part of Africa to western part, between northern part to southern part, and also the central part. So different parts, but I think there has been some movement, there has been some forward movement in the last couple of years, in the last couple of decades. In some ways, it is in positive ways. But I think the basic point is the governance issue, the governance deficit, and also in terms of the legitimacy of those regimes, I think that still remains. We also tried to cover a little bit about Africa during the Cold War, 1945 to 1990, and Africa in the post-Cold War from 1990 onwards. And I think in that respect, the role of the United Nations as a major international body is very significant, very important in terms of peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building. Simultaneously, the role of major powers, particularly the United States of America, Russia, China, lately in the last couple of decades, and also the different European powers, countries like India, like Japan, they also have got impacted. On human security also, there are important human security issues that the African countries have to juggle with. And in some ways, they are making some progress, but I think still the challenges remain and they're trying to overcome those challenges and also the different impediments and obstacles that they faced. The issue of deterritorialization means the uprooting of the indigenous culture, indigenous people from their tribal homelands, from their clan areas, and trying to resettle them or relocate them to other places. And what impact it has politically, socially, economically, and also most importantly, culturally. I think that's very, very important. The violence that takes place in different parts of Africa and how that has impacted the progress cycle of Africa, that I think is very, very important. And finally, the Unit-16 is India and Africa, how that has impacted in many different ways, and how India has a very proactive policy toward Africa in the last couple of decades. And today, India is in a situation where I have said in the 2 years ago when we had this G20 summit in Delhi, India was in the front seat in co-opting African Union, AU, as a member of the G20. So thanks to India's leadership, India's initiative, now Africa is getting its due place, has earned its place. Now Africa is a proud member. A couple of months ago, I think late last year, when there was a conference in Brazil of the G20 last year, Prime Minister Modi went to Brazil, and I think the African Union was represented by its leader. So Africa does have its own significance. Also, I think in the 1990s, when we talk about globalization, Africa was also impacted in many ways, in many things. Some positive things took place in terms of social upliftment, social empowerment, economic development, etc. But I think at the same time, there was this inherent contradictions between a strive or to maintain the identity, maintain the distinctiveness, the uniqueness of the local culture, the local economy, the local setup kind of things, and the role of the local elite also. I think that was also impacted. So what Africa has done is, at least in most countries in Africa, is to trying to make a blend between globalization and localization. So what you get is a hybrid form and hybridization, if I can say so, which is global at local. So when you combine global with local, it becomes glocal. That is a new term that is coming up. So you try to blend the best of the global practices, whatever globalization offers, liberalization, privatization, like in India, for example. At the same time, you retain the basic core of the distinctive nature of the African societies, African culture, African ethos, African norms, etc., and trying to find a fine tune about a nice judicial mix or a nice balance between the two. And I think most of the African countries, they've been trying to do that at the same time. And that's why I think you see a lot of forward looking movements in that area. So Africa has definitely emerged in the New World Order. It is a member of the United Nations in most of the world bodies. Now, as I said, Africa is a member of the G20 summit, which takes place every year, and where they can put forth all their agenda, all the issues that they face, in which way they can contribute. This is in a post-globalized world, in the post-1990s world, we live in an interdependent society, which is highly interconnected. Before 1990, in the Cold War period, mostly it was self-dependency. But today it is an interconnected world, interdependent world. In many ways, for example, a small country like Niger in Africa, they have got a lot of uranium, thorium, etc. There are countries like South Africa, they have got gold mines, diamond mines. There are a lot of minerals out there in Ethiopia, Sudan, even Somalia, Mozambique, in many parts. You go to Congo, Malawi, Liberia. So every country, they have got some advantages in terms of economic resources, in terms of mineral resources, in terms of marine resources. There are many. So why not you tap into all the things that they can offer us, and what we can offer? We means the developed countries, the developing countries, the underdeveloped countries. So each country can try to make it. And other thing is, when you help somebody, let us say country A, I don't like to name anyone, has got a lot of advantages in terms of providing assistance, aid, etc., etc. So the thing is, you have to see the long-term impact. If you, in the process, if a particular African country is very much underdeveloped, if you can help that country in some meaningful way, in some tangible ways, over a period of time, maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that country can stand up on its own leg. Like the example that I gave in the morning class in India and the world, India had food insufficiency in the early 60s due to variety of internal factors, plus the famine, the drought, etc. But we consciously took a decision that we should go for a green revolution. We should develop sufficient food grains for our own people. And to the leadership, thanks to the people, thanks to the scientists, agricultural experts, India by 70s and by 80s, India is in a position of advantage. India is a self-sufficient country. Same thing is happening in Africa also, in terms of agricultural productivity, in terms of green revolution, in terms of the white revolution. There are many areas, many countries in Africa which are very rich in dairy resources, the milk resources, etc. And also the green, the blue revolution. There is a long coastline. If you check the map of Africa, the entire coastlines in the Mediterranean and also in the eastern coastlines, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, etc. That's Mozambique. They have got a huge coastlines. So there is an abundance of marine resources, and that can be tapped into the economic well-being or economic might of those particular countries. So yes, Africa is a member of the New World Orders in many productive ways. There are a lot of things Africa can offer to the rest of the world, and simultaneously in a reciprocal way, the rest of the world can also offer to Africa. The slave trade, just a reminder, is a stark reminder, okay? A very sad reminder though, of the 15th century, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the slave trade, how it was used like economic commodities in North America, in many parts of Europe, etc., etc., and how the blacks for a long, long time, they are not treated as the same path with the white population. And this policy of apartheid, racial segregation in many parts of Africa, including South Africa, that was practiced where there is a distinct segregation and division along the racial lines. The white people, the black people, and the colored people. The colored people are those people like the migrants, people going from, let us say, India or Southeast Asia, okay? Uh, Going over there for indentured laborers or going for business, etc., etc., and how they face discrimination. So the society was completely divided along the racial lines. Only the white people they preferred, and that continued well into the mid 80s. When I was just pursuing my PhD in America in the early 80s, there is a lot of movement against the universities because a lot of the big universities in USA like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell, many of those universities, they put a lot of investment in those particular countries. Okay, so a lot of people felt there was a big movement to disinvest from those governments, and there was a big movement by African National Congress (ANC), led by Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for a long time, and finally South Africa. By the end of 1980s, it became a desegregated society. Africa was a multiracial society. The governments, the PW, both are the last of the apartheid regime governments. It collapsed, and which was replaced by de Klerk, and also then Mandela became the first duly elected president of the post racial societies in South Africa. For a long time, as far as India is concerned, India had a long policy of not dealing with the white regimes because they felt, the Indian government felt for a long time that it is a very racist thing to do. You cannot discriminate based on the race, on color, on creed, etc., etc. And the South African cricket team, for example, they are not allowed to play in India for a long time because of this racial policy, the policy of racial segregation. But once South Africa became desegregated, everybody was treated equally in terms of race, color, etc. Then South Africa is allowed. Today, if you check, when South African cricket team comes to India or Indian team goes to South Africa to play Test cricket or T20, etc., you see people from Indian origin, people from blacks, people whites, everybody's playing in that particular time. But think about the days when Gandhi went, Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, our leader, he went to South Africa in the late 19th century, 1890s, later part of 1890s. The way he fought against all odds, he fought for the rights of the Indian laborers over there, people who are working day and night, but they're not getting the due compensation and the due respect that they deserve. And for many decades, Africa was portrayed as a deep continent, a dark continent, which was devoid of the history, culture, social, political institutions by the different colonial masters, by the British, by the Germans, by the French, by the Italians, by the Portuguese, by the Dutch. A lot of these European powers who colonized Africa in different parts of Africa, they tried to do that. And there is a particular term called scramble for Africa. So scramble means what? You just run after a piece of cake or something, a piece of apple pie or things like that. So Africa was treated just like a prize commodity that every colonial power wanted to hang on to. So they basically, I don't want to use the hard term like stealing it, but they took away all the raw materials over there to England, to Birmingham, to Manchester, etc., and then tried to reprocess it. And the finished product again went back to Africa, and you have to pay 2 or 3 times more the price. And the economy of those European powers, the colonial powers, it got enriched, okay? But the economic power and might of the African countries from where you took all these mineral resources, it got reduced and reduced. The transplantation of European ideas and institutions, that also affected African polity and society, that also had a very unpredictable impact on Africa. In some areas, did have some positive impact, particularly in terms of the legal practices, in terms of judicial areas, in terms of educational institutions, introduction of English language, for example. Like in India, a lot of these early universities like Madras, like Calcutta, etc., Mumbai, they have got English language educations. But down the road, the vernacular languages, the mother tongue, etc., it got a back seat. So I think there is a plus and minus. So you have to see both the ups and downs, both the upside as well as the downside. The strength of ideas, Africa as a net importer of manufactured goods, food, and ideas. Mm, Impact of external powers, particularly I'm talking about 18th and 19th century, but in the 20th century, in the latter half of 20th century, the United States of America, they wanted to have their spheres of influence and trying to expand it and trying to, sometimes we have heard the stories of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, or even the Soviet KGB, the intelligence agency. They are trying to have their own say in terms of installing their own puppet regimes, their own favorite governments. Even though they are very unpopular and very ruthless and very repressive, still the governments were ruling over there with the backside support of some of these big powers. But over a period of time, they did not have the democratic roots, they did not have legitimacy, etc. And ultimately, the governments collapsed. What happens in Africa, for the most part, in the 20th century, we see a lot of issues related to food insecurity, severe famines, heavy dependence on food aid, inter and intra-state wars. Okay, within the state, there are fights for civil strife, there are fights for competition over resources, different tribal groups, different clan groups, different ethnic groups that are also trying to stake out their own spheres of influence and trying to dominate over the other minority groups. Environmental degradations, wasteful use of natural and human resources, lack of sustainable development. Yes, it is true that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals did make some headway, did make some tangible movement, or the Millennium Development Goals in terms of child mortality, women's issues, empowerment issues, etc., etc. But I think overall, the impact was a little bit mixed, I would say. The health, education, etc., the weak link between post-colonial society, the contested borders, that was again another important issue that affected a large part or a large swath of the territories in Africa, the contested borders. Everybody's trying to, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and many places, like you saw in Sudan a couple of years ago. They had a big civil war. Ultimately, South Sudan became independent, and it happens in many places. Recently, you must have seen a news a couple of weeks ago, I guess, when Donald Trump, the president of the USA, he tried to mediate a conciliation or mediate between the countries like Rwanda and Congo. Ultimately, they decided not to fight with each other and trying to find some common grounds and find some truce. So I think, in short, I think Africa is neither a dark continent nor a hopeless thing, but I think Africa has made some positive strides in the last couple of decades. But I think still there is a long way to go that needs to be discussed. In terms of India and Africa, they have got a lot of commonalities in terms of society, in terms of cultural norms, etc. Both India and Africa, they fought against colonialism, against apartheid, which again, as I said, is racial segregation, against poverty. Historical backgrounds, since the Vedic period, how Egypt has been mentioned, and we had got the early Indian settlers going to different parts of Africa way back in 17th, 18th centuries. And since then, the number has only increased. And along with that, the impact of Indians has also increased. Gandhi's role is needless to say, that was a big transformative phase in India-Africa relations when Gandhi sailed from Bombay to Pretoria to Johannesburg in South Africa. He spent there a couple of years. I think that not only brought a big change in Gandhi's mindset. If you read the book of Ramchandra Guha, if you have seen the movie Gandhi, directed by Richard Attenborough, you can see how Gandhi, African trip by Gandhi was a big turning point in not only in Gandhi's psychology of understanding the world views and the contemporary world at that point of time in the late 1990s against colonialism, fighting for independence for India and also other colonies. So I think that was very, very important. After India became independent in 1947, India was the leading founding member of non-alignment movement, which the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, was the prime architect of the policy of non-alignments. And there are some other leaders like the Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the leader from Ghana and Nkrumah. From Kenya, we have got Jim Kenyatta. From Tanzania, you have got Julius Nyerere. So there are many leaders, plus Yugoslavia, Marshal Tito, in Indonesia, Sukarno. All of these leaders, they are founding members of the non-alignment movement. But the core of this non-alignment movement was basically fighting against discrimination, fighting against colonization of different parts of the world, including in Africa. So in 1955, the Bandung Conference took place, where India and some of these African countries, they took part in terms of having a non-alignment. Because at the end of the Cold War in 1945, basically America was the leading superpower, and later on Soviet Union, then Soviet Union. It became also a leading contender of the alignment politics. You have got NATO, North Atlantic Alliance. You also have got the Warsaw Pact. So the whole world was divided into different military blocs. So the non-alignment people, they wanted to carve a separate path, a third path of one of independence, okay? Trying to assert their own independence, their own sovereignty, etc. And I think to a large extent, they are very successful. A lot of people will say that non-alignment is like isolationism, non-commitment, neutrality, neutralization, unilateralism, non-involvement. So I think a lot of these things are not true or far from true. Because if I say non-commitment or non-involvement, or even the word non-alignment, it starts with a non, means in a very negative connotation. But I think in reality, it is a more positive concept rather than it is in a negative overtones. It is against hegemony by any state. So that is one of the primary principle of non-alignment, against hegemony by any state. So no country should have a predominance over another country. Against military alliances, no NATO membership, no Warsaw membership, no membership in any military alliances. Against the Cold War. At the end of World War II, in 1945, the world did not see a major power confrontation between US and Soviet Union. But we have got Cold War. The Cold War is different from the hot war of World War I or World War II, for example, in the sense that the two major powers at that time, 45 to 90, USA and Soviet Union, they did not fight directly with one another, but they fought by proxy, whether it is in Cuba or Panama or Haiti or Hungary or Czechoslovakia or Poland. You can take any number of examples in that one. Non-alignment also, as it applies to Africa, is against ideological polarizations of the world. We don't take any ideology that capitalism is better or communism is better or socialism. Each country is entitled to have their own ideological moorings, the way it suits them. There is no imposition from the above by any countries to maintain or to sustain one particular form of ideology. Choosing its own path to development. Some countries, they go slow. Some people try to go fast. Some people try to go very careful, in a balanced, in a calibrated manner. So I think that's very, very important. Emphasis on mutual friendship and equality. Mutual. I respect you, you respect me. India respects Congo. India respects Mozambique. India respects Kenya, Ethiopia, Namibia. Very recently, I think last week or on the way back, Prime Minister Modi, he stopped in Namibia. Prime Minister has been to many countries in Africa. So the idea is to develop friendship, to develop people-to-people contact, of course, political relationship, the economic relationship, trade, welfare, etc. And also equality, in terms of equality. Okay? Non-alignment and support for UN and the major restructuring of the UN. One of the main issues of UN has been United Nations, has been that in terms of the power structure, it still remains the same as it was at the end of World War II. But the world has changed since 1945. Today, we are talking about 2025, some 75, 80 years. And a lot of the power equation has changed. Look at Europe, for example. Great Britain is important, but it is not that important as it was in 1945. It is Germany which is number one, but Germany is not a member of the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member. There are many other countries in Europe, Sweden, Denmark, Netherlands, Austria, I can name many, Spain, they have also moved up in the economic ladder, in the political ladders. Okay? But it is Great Britain and France, they still retain the veto power. They are still the permanent members of the United Nations. There are many countries in Africa, they have made a lot of strides in the last 5 or 6 decades. Egypt, for example, South Africa, for example, Nigeria, for example. But in terms of even geographical representation, none of the African countries are represented as a United Nations Security Council member. And so is India. India is a leading power in the world today. Everybody recognizes that, everybody acknowledges that. India is the most populous country in the world. India contributes very significantly and in very positive ways to the UN peacekeeping efforts. India is one of the rare countries that pays for the UN funding, etc., etc. So in many ways, in terms of WHO, UNESCO, WHO, WHO, and many things, India has been playing a very important role, and India has been a founding member of the establishment of United Nations since 1945 in San Francisco. But India is not a member of the UN Security Council as a permanent member, and India is still fighting for that. Japan is not a member. Brazil and Argentina, they are not members, and none of the African countries. So I think the point I'm trying to make is there has to be a geographical balance. There has to be a representation of all the continents at least. And I think in that respect, non-alignment is a positive move by the African countries to make its own say, and so that they can compete for their own space. Some people will blame that non-alignment is a case of dual alignment or poly-alignment. I think that is not true, because every country, as I said, is totally entitled to have its own spheres of path of development, etc. During the Cold War, as far as India is concerned, for a variety of reasons, India was supported by Soviet Union, and India supported Soviet Union. Yeah, of course, India has a good relations with the United States of America and many other countries in the world. And maybe some people will say that India put all its eggs in one basket, namely the Russian basket or Soviet Union basket. Maybe it is true. But when the Cold War ended in 1990, the post-Cold War era, India was becoming smarter and wiser. Instead of putting all eggs in one basket, namely the Soviet Union basket, India tried to diversify its foreign policy, its defense policies, its diplomacy. And now different countries in the world, they are having also equal meaningful interactions with India, including countries in Africa, countries in North America, Latin America, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, etc., etc. Non-alignment, end of colonization. The colonization process, as I said, started around in the mid-40s, at the end of World War II, 45, 47, 50s. By the end of 1950s and early 60s, most of the African countries, one by one, they became decolonized. They became independent from the respective colonial powers. And there is a sense of resurgence of nationalistic spirit, thanks to the leadership given by India and many other countries to call for independence. I think that's very, very important. The role of the rise of the third world and developing countries. Non-alignment has also made some movement in the age of globalization. They are fully committed to human rights, climate change, global warming, issues on AIDS, pandemics like COVID-19, H1N1, Ebola, ISIS, the Al-Qaeda elements, the terrorists, the counter efforts for counter-terrorism, drug trafficking, human trafficking. On many of these issues, Africa has been taking a very proactive stance on all of these issues, which are global in nature, but also Africa can make some contributions. Non-alignment and the new international economic orders, and mostly the non-alignment 2.0, which is a new non-alignment variation, which emphasizes on strategic autonomy. So if it is in the national interest of a country, any countries, including any African countries, they have a right to take a strategic decision, which in their opinion is good for their country, both in the short term as well as in the long term. So I think that's very, very important. In terms of the UN and Africa, almost all the African countries, they are members of the UN by this time. Like India, of course, India and Africa relation has also got a big boost because India has a meaningful peacekeeping operations in Congo, in Somalia, in Angola, Liberia, Rwanda, South Sudan, and many other countries. India stand on disarmament. India cut off diplomatic relations in 1949 on the issue of racial discrimination, policy of apartheid, and India provided active support to the jailed leader at that time, Nelson Mandela. India supported the independence of Namibia. Now Namibia is an independent country, as I just said. Prime Minister Modi made a visit to Namibia to boost the relations, the bilateral relations between India and Namibia. India is a strong supporter of UN effort for the protection of human rights. UN Declaration of Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day, as you all know, is on December 10, 1948, and India has been a champion of international human rights. India has also supported the UN missions in Africa through its branches on UNDP, United Nations Development Program, UNICEF, WHO, World Health Organization, ILO, International Labour Organization, UNICEF, FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, ICAO, etc. India and UNSC reforms, as I just said, India wants Africa to be represented as a permanent member of the United Nations so that the UN Security Council should be representative of all the continents, and that should also reflect the power realities of contemporary world at this point of time, not the world of 1945, because a lot of things has changed from 1945 to 2025. On 11 December 2014, UN General Assembly adopted International Yoga Day on the 21st of June each year. And in many African countries, yoga is very important. Of course, India has a very robust and vibrant soft power, and yoga is another important element, an integral part of the India's soft power capabilities. India also is in the forefront of International Equality Day that they have been trying to declare at the UN chamber on April 14, which is incidentally coincides with the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. So India is the pioneering member of International Yoga Day on 21st June, and also is a prime mover behind International Equality Day, coinciding with the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And of course, a lot of these indigenous products in Africa and India, India has been a leading power 2 years ago when Prime Minister declared 2023 as the year of the millet. So there has been a lot of popularity, there has been a lot of emphasis on how to develop millet as a healthy food, as a nutritious food. UN reforms, sustainable development goals, counter-terrorism, disarmament, and how India has a zero-tolerance policy toward terrorism, not only in all over the world, including in Africa, including in many different parts of the world. In terms of human security, basically, as I said, human security takes different forms and sizes, and it affects Sub-Saharan Africa and different parts of Africa in terms of war, in poverty, hunger, health, corruption, bureaucracy, bad governance, etc., etc. Human security, you can see how it affects the homes, the community, the streets, people's job, in the environment, how it is affecting the poor countries, particularly in Africa, in terms of hunger, ill health, ethnic conflicts, social disintegration, transmittable disease, natural resource depletion, drug trafficking, refugee influx, weapons of mass destructions, supply of assault weapons to different tribal groups, environmental pollutions. So there are all kinds of issues that affect the different dimensions of human securities. Human security also affects in profound ways the health security, the food security, economic security, environmental security, political security, personal security, community security. So it's a very wide canvas of human security. I'm not saying everything has been resolved, but at least there has been a movement to tackle the different elements of human security in very meaningful ways. And I think to a large extent, different African countries, they've been making progress in very positive ways in that particular areas. And of course, there has been effort by the different aid agencies around the world, and of course, individual countries also. 4 or 5 years ago, during the COVID crisis, the COVID-19 epidemic as a pandemic, India, for example, it did provide a lot of these COVID vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin to different African countries. India has also provided a lot of agricultural products, a lot of technologies, etc., to the African countries. And I think they have made some very tangible progress in that particular ways. I think in terms of uh, India-Africa relation, I think we need to remember that it is a two-way street, as I said. For example, India imports from Africa, from different countries, stuff like leather, petroleum, crude, pearls, wood, wooden pulps, raw cotton, iron ore, fertilizers, steels, um, and also India exports to Africa different medicines, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, transport equipments, small and medium industries, plastics, wheat, iron and steel, tobacco, spices, cotton, jute, rubber, and many other areas. So I think in many different ways, India has been developing a very multifarious uh, interactions with different African countries in terms of economy, defense. We do have a limited defense cooperation with many African countries. Sometimes we do military exercises, sometimes we provide non-lethal weapons so that at least they can opt very defensive in nature. India also have a very vibrant cultural connect with Africa. Needless to say, there is a sizable diasporic population that lives in many different parts of Africa. Literally, in every African country, you will find a good amount of Indian diaspora living there. In some countries like Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, for many, many years. They have been there for many, many decades. If you remember, the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who was the Prime Minister of UK, United Kingdom, he was born in Kenya. He's from Indian origin. Many people, they have migrated to different parts of Africa, and since then they have become domiciled in that particular place, and they have been doing pretty well economically, business-wise, trade, commerce, politically as well. And there are countries like Mauritius that have become big Indian diasporic population. They've been holding important positions in the government and other places. There has been also the diasporic influences in terms of the policy making approaches, and that also helps as a bridge between the country of origin, maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago of India, and the country of adoption over there. So I think they have been doing a lot of positive ways and how to take that things forward in many different global issues. As I said, global warming, climate change, terrorism issues, drug trafficking, human trafficking, trying to contain weapons of mass destruction, etc., etc. In terms of ethnicity, I think there is a lot of things that we need to remember. Is ethnicity is a huge discourse in terms of ethnic primordialism, ethnic enclaves, ethnic solidarities, and that inherent struggle between the melting pot and salad bowl. As I've said in one of the classes, in melting pot means what? People coming from different ethnic origins. Like, for example, I can give you an example of people going to America or Canada or Australia, okay, with Laos, from Vietnam, from Philippines, from China, from India, from Central Asia, from Southern Europe, from Northern Europe. So they carry with them the social baggage, the cultural baggage, and when they go to that countries, they carry that particular ethos over there. That happens in Africa also. But over a period of time, what you see is there is a big difference between the first generation and second generation. There is a class. Second generation and third generation, or the fourth generation. That happened in America. I've done some limited study on the impact of migration, immigration to some of the countries. And you can see the clear distinction. The first generation people, they are being more nostalgia. They remember that country because they went there as an adult for higher education. Ultimately, they stayed. They thought that they will stay for a couple of years and come back. For a variety of reasons, they stayed back. then that process became longer and longer. The second generation, their children, they grew up there, they went, got their education, they got a job, sometimes they got married over there. You have got these biracial, interracial relationships. Then over a period of time, they also took part in the mainstream societies, economic arena, political arena, trade, commerce, cultural arena. So today, you see these big paradoxical things between the first generation, second generation, third generation. So that is one of the things that you see in a migration. That is, migration, I think, is a very important concept. That is a very innovative things, and it needs a lot of study and lot of critical discourse. And in terms of research topic, I think it's a very exciting topic. Why migration takes place, how migration affect different countries differently, how different cycles of migration has taken place, and what impact it has on the recipient societies, whether it is Mozambique or Kenya or Ethiopia or any of those countries, or even for that matter, any part of the world. And I think that needs a lot of studies, particularly in terms of some people would like to maintain their own cultural distinctiveness, own cultural milieu, own cultural uniqueness, cultural pluralisms kind of thing. But at the same time, they would like to take advantage of whatever the mainstream societies do offer. They like to take the advantage of both the things. So they are caught in a situation. There are some people who, of course, they like to stay in a particular locality or a neighborhood, which I think some people say ghettoization. Okay, like you go to New York City, for example, you go to places like Brooklyn or Bronx or even Queens. These are the small boroughs. New York is not a one particular city. It consists of 4 or 5 clusters that combines New York City. You have got Queens, you have got Bronx, you have got Brooklyn, you have got Manhattan, where the United Nations is there, the World Trade Center is there, the big department store, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, etc. They are there. Okay, so you see the people how they are competing along the racial lines, along the ethnic lines, and along the ghettoization kind of thing. But at the same time, you see there is a new generation of the immigrants or the migrants who try to be on their own. And I think that creates a lot of cultural cleavages, social cleavages that I think needs to be discussed, that needs to be managed. Okay. So there, the issues of identity, in terms of the policy orientation, policy impact, in terms of primordiality versus multiculturality. I think that primordiality means what? I am from India, okay? I go to a particular countries. I still maintain my own rituals, my own belief systems, my own ways of thinking, my own ways of living. That is called a primordial attachments. Like a child is attached to his or her mom, okay? So that is primordial, which is, there is nothing wrong about it. But over a period of time, you need to think about it. How long can you stretch this umbilical cord with the land of origins? Particularly when the second generation, the third generation, the fourth generation that comes into it. And there, I think the policy makings and a lot of the other issues that do come along. We see that in the context of Africa also, in terms of Anglo-conformity, like people who, let us say, an Indian family living in England for many, many years or maybe decades, then going to South Africa or going to Liberia, or going to Congo, Malawi, to any places in Cameroon. But then they are totally, it's like instead of one single identity, what you see is a multiple identities. Okay. So sometimes it's very confused kind of thing. So what they are they Indian? Are they British? Are they South African? Are they multiracials? And sometimes they get married to some person from the local communities. So there, I think the issues of multiple identities that also come into play. And some people like to fiercely retain their own independence or their own self. At the same time, they are having a class of, I would say, like Samuel Huntington's class of civilization, or the Christian world versus the Islamic world versus the Jewish world, etc., etc. The tribal dominance of one tribe over the other, the one clan over the other. So, you are caught up with a different class of things. Then how you survive, how you wriggle out, how you manage to move up out of this particular cycle. I think that's a important concept, and how you manage this process of cultural culturations and acculturations. assimilation, non-assimilation. You assimilate. How much you assimilate? Partly assimilate or complete assimilation or non-assimilation. If you do a non-assimilationist approach, then you are in trouble because you have been there for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Okay. So assimilation versus non-assimilation, culturation, culturalization versus acculturation. So, all of these important dimensions of ethnic literature, ethnic discourse, ethnic uh, studies are very, very significant, and particularly the way it impacts migration of different groups and different things, and in cycles like in a wave, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, and a lot of times, not only migration, but the reverse migration, that also creates a lot of complications, a lot of issues. A lot of people went to Uganda. I remember in the 1970s, there was a leader in Uganda, for example, which is a very important African country, and the leader was Idi Amin, a military person. Okay? He felt that the Indians over there, mostly people from Gujarat and other places, they become very rich, they become neo-rich, and they try to exploit the economy of that country. And the local Ugandan people, they were the top dogs in terms of economy. They are in the upper stretches. But over a period of time, the top dogs became underdogs, and vice versa. The underdogs became top dogs. So Idi Amin had a policy, let Uganda be ruled by original indigenous Ugandans. Okay. So he decided to expel all the Asians living there. Particularly, it affected a lot of the Indians who have been there for decades. And they've been so successful in business, in commerce, and many of those things. So that created a big issue in the 70s. You may not remember that. You can check in the Google or in any books for that matter. How the Indians people, the Asians, they got expelled from Uganda. Then some of them, they went to Hong Kong, they went to United Kingdom, some of them came back to India. How that created again another cultural backlash over here. Okay, when suddenly thousands and thousands of people coming back. Okay? So like recently you see how in the Middle East, particularly in places like Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Emirates, okay, because of this movement for pan-Arabism, let Arabs be the major factors in their own respective economy. So this Arabization, so a lot of the people, particularly in the lower end, they are not getting good jobs over there, and now they are coming back to Kerala, coming back to Maharashtra, coming back to the places. So how that is creating things. So instead of migration, this reverse migration. Okay. So how that is affecting the local economy over there from the places where they are coming, and also over here when suddenly they are unable to find roots here because they left 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. For a variety of reasons, as I said, gave this example of Uganda in the 70s. So it took a long time for these people to again implant. Again, that creates a lot of policy implications. So thanks to the government of India, I think in lately government has made at least some policies. I would not say it has solved all the problems, but at least some policies in terms of I would say the OCI card, Overseas Citizens of India, PIO card, persons of Indian origin, having a very robust Ministry of Overseas Indians, Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. There is a desk in the Ministry of External Affairs to deal with issues, the labor issue, migration issues. Some of the Indians who go to different parts of Africa or Middle East, some of them are being exploited, they are being underpaid. Sometimes their passports are being seized. Okay, I think there are now some mechanisms, there are some grievance still over there. They are at least looking into it. They are addressing these concerns to the best possible way. So there has been some movement in that particular way. So in terms of the broad theoretical aspect, migration, this immigrating to a particular countries, that also exists, and that applies of Indians going to different parts of Africa. Some people stay there for a long, long time. Some people come back. Some people have got a dual nationalities. They maintain their residence over there. They also visit our countries also. So I think there are a lot of issues. It's not simple to put it in a black and white kind of thing. There are a lot of gray areas that I think that needs to be discussed. The issues of civil rights, that is very important. Political rights. Again, I think it's very important that we should resist the temptation of implanting our viewpoint, our definition of democracy, our definition of human security, our definition of human rights, our definition of progress, for example. It 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 varies from person to person. Like in a particular family, if you ask somebody, what is the stuff that you are looking for in a breakfast? Maybe you need something different. Maybe I need something different. Okay. So we need to respect the different cultures and subcultures and different aspects of that, and the different ways these countries need to take that country forward in a very positive way, in a forward-looking way, how they would like to shape that particular countries. Okay, so the idea is the key core is the vision 2030 or vision 2040 of Congo, of Malawi, of Nigeria, of South Africa, Namibia. You name any countries. There are so many hundreds of countries over there. And again, don't put them in a homogeneous basket. It is not homogeneous. It is heterogeneous. It is unequal. It is uneven. So I think once we recognize that it is all different, just like apples and oranges. Apples are apples, oranges are oranges. You cannot equate the two because the history is different, the baggages are different, the cultural ethos are different. People have come from different backgrounds, and you cannot just put them into one single basket and hope that everything moves along. Africa is a very, very multicultural, multi-ethnic, intra-ethnic things kind of thing. You look at even in India, look at, for example, you go to Bihar, Jharkhand, Mizoram, Nagaland, it's one India. They are also Indians. You go to Gujarat, you go to Maharashtra, you go to part of Karnataka, they're also different. So you see rich India, poor India. You see affluent India and Bimaru India, quote unquote. Okay, but all are Indians. Okay, there are significant tribal population in places like Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, in Odisha, and many places. You go to the coastal belt, there is a big class of fishermen in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, in Puducherry, etc., etc. So you have to take everybody along. That's the key thing. Same thing applies in Africa also. So we need a more systematic discussions, a dialogue, a discussion, a more deliberations, how we can tackle these issues in the short term, in the intermediate term, and also in the long term. And I think if you can do that, I think a lot of these things can be handled, like genocide issue, the massacre, the violence, the torture, rape, maltreatment, the physical constraint, the population issues, and many of those issues. I think those are very, very the issues of polarization. So I think we can discuss a lot. This again, the one things I'd like to say is the issue of deterritorialization, which means the removing the indigenous people from their land. Okay, so I'm not saying it is all bad and all negative. The thing is, you need to think of the step after, the day after. If a particular person coming from a hinterland or a countryside, okay, and you take away the land, okay, so how you are going to compensate that? Not only in terms of economic terms, like providing a job or livelihood, etc., but in terms of psychology, in terms of cultural things, okay, how you are going to help that? How you means the government of the day, state government, the federal government, etc. The same thing happening in different African countries as well. How the central government, how they are going to provide the help, either solo or with the active assistance of the foreign powers. Okay, because a lot of the foreign countries, I think, with all due respect, they are providing economic aid to these countries. USAID, Agency for International Development, they have been giving huge amount of money. If you take the example of Japan, ODI, Official Development Assistance, and JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, they provide huge amount of money to literally all the African countries so that they can make some tangible movements in their own respective spheres. Look at China under BRI, Belt and Road Initiatives, under One Belt, One Road, they're also providing it. India is providing a huge amount of within their own limited economic capacities to literally all the African countries. So I think most of these G20 countries, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like France, UK, they're all helping in different ways, in different forms and steps. And you need to put a cab on the bureaucracy. Sometimes there is a bureaucratic overreach, corruptions at the low places, even at the top places, how you try to control and curb that, and how you need to have a game plan. You need to have a blueprint because it cannot be done overnight. There is no Aladdin's lamp here. There is no magic wand here. You need to work consciously with all the stakeholders, okay? With all the important stakeholders from the governing side, from the opposition side, the civil society, the NGOs, everybody takes a part. The educated elite, the power elite, the local elite, the agricultural elites, everybody need to sit together and trying to find out what is the best way possible so that at least we can take Africa notch higher 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, so that it is not being looked, as I said at the beginning, as a dark continent, quote unquote. Maybe it is a bright future. Maybe it is morning in Africa again. Okay. So I think we need to have a more proactive approach. We need to think in terms of glass as half full rather than glass as half empty. If we need to have that kind of optimism, that kind of a forward-looking approach, I think Africa can go quite far. And I think I can see a bright future of Africa in the next, at least, if not in the short term of 5 years, but at least in the medium term of, let us say, 10 to 20 years. So I think that's all I have to say about Africa, the state and society. It is, again, as I said, it's a very exciting area. Maybe somebody would like to pursue a higher research programs. There are many components of Africa. Maybe we can take in a sectoral ways or subsectoral ways or an issue area, and we can do some meaningful research on that one. And maybe that can add to the body of knowledge, and that definitely will be enriching to the people who are doing that research, plus the people who are studying that. So with that, I think let me conclude. Supriya, any questions, any comments, any final thoughts?
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I enjoyed this session. I got the overview.
Yes.
Hello, sir. I'm
Yes.
audible.
Yes. Yeah. You are audible.
Sir, I got multitude of thoughts of everything from the economic, from the security, from the political, and what Africa is doing, what other nations doing, like many initiatives which the previous government, I know particularly about the APJ Abdul Kalam, sir. He had some, sir, I think some uh, technical cooperation, and we have this, sir, sir, online classes also for the African nations, sir.
Mhm.
So, like, I know about these two initiatives, but sir, like, my concern is that, sir, Africa is still grappled with many their internal issues.
Yes.
Like, so if you take the example of Sudan, I know so 2 3 nations like which is grappled like very badly. So like a military coup and everything, like so Sudan, Burkina Faso, then
Yes.
so Niger also. So then we have nation like Somalia, which is going through a tough times of like managing their nation, like so the hunger and natural calamities, which is very prevalent.